How often do you think to yourself, should I quit my job? Should I focus on that art project? Should I abandon my degree? Should I go travel for a year? How do we choose between choosing a life of adventure, choosing a life of experience, and choosing a life of security? Hello and welcome back to the Kalopsia pod. I'm your host Sydney, and I'm so thankful, so thrilled, so happy that you guys clicked on this week's episode. This week I wanted to talk about how do we make these types of decisions? How do we choose between doing what is kind of expected of us, doing what is the most secure, the most certain path, and doing the unexpected, doing the creative path, doing the unknown, flying by the seat of our pants, right? How do we choose which one is the right path? And I was led to think about this topic because I've actually been reading Death in Her Hands by Otessa Moshfegh, and I had a little bit of trouble getting into it because it is very stream of consciousness writing, but I feel like at the point at which I am in now, a lot of things have stuck with me from the book, and one of the biggest ones is the following quote: "There's nothing more heartbreaking than a squandered opportunity, a mischance. I knew about stuff like that. I'd been young once. So many dreams had been dashed. But I dashed them myself. I wanted to be safe, whole, have a future of certainty. One makes mistakes when there is confusion between having a future at all and having the future one wants." Now, I was like, wow, this is really something, because to be honest with you guys, I've been having a little bit of trouble recently because I am thinking about going back to school very soon, and I'm thinking about how that would impact my creativity, how that would impact the growth of this podcast, how that would impact my continuation and my commitment to myself and my creative desires. Am I not choosing myself by doing this degree, or am I just fueling my goals and fueling my capacities and broadening my scope by going back to finish this degree? And so this has been kind of circling on my mind, and when I read this, I was struck by the very end of that quote. One makes mistakes when you are having to choose between having a future at all and having the future one wants. Now, this kind of made me think about work in general, and also what comes to mind when you often see these interviews of older generations being interviewed about their lives and about their peaks and their pits, their greatest regrets. And I feel like one of the biggest things that I often notice from those videos, from those interviews, is that I regret not having quit my job. I regret not having tried a different sectors. I regret having not married that one person. I regret not having prioritized this experience. And a lot of the time, the regrets that are in question aren't necessarily something that they did wrong or a mistake that they made, but rather a choice that they made. And it's rather an experience that they forfeited. And this actually reminds me of a Tony Bravo YouTube video that I had watched where they went on this brand trip, but it was only 4 people on the brand trip, which is very unique when it comes to brand trips. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the brand and influencer sector. I realize it's a little bit niche, but typically you're going to have 10s, maybe 15 individuals, but this one only had 4, and it was an artist retreat. And in the video, she actually included in a story of the artist that was kind of hosting this event at the retreat. And I don't know her name. She didn't put her name in, which was a little bit frustrating, but it was a beautiful story about how this woman found herself having moved to France after going to Aix-en-Provence, this place in France, to complete some degree, and how she ended up moving there. And so kind of a synopsis of her story. Again, I don't know her name. I don't know what her book was. She was reading this story from a book as well. I believe she made a whole novel about it, or surrounding her art as well. But I thought it was really interesting, so I did want to bring it up. And that is that she moved to Aix-en-Provence when she was 21 years old. She was only there for 6 months. She didn't speak the language, and she essentially spent all of her time either focusing on this artist retreat or whatever she was doing there. And the other rest of the time, she had fallen in love, right? She had fallen in love with this French boyfriend. She was 21. She was there for 6 months. It was doomed from the start, but she fell in love and she had this whole French boyfriend. And apparently they didn't even speak each other's languages, so they always had this handy-dandy dictionary at hand so that they could understand each other. But eventually, the 6 months passed and she had to leave. She had to go home. But she found herself being so absolutely devastated about having to leave this French boyfriend that she ended up calling her dad and she said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to come back home. I think I'm going to stay here. And apparently the dad was, disappointed to hear that, but he said, you do whatever you want. You know what? That's fine. If it's this devastating to you, something along those lines, right? I am obviously paraphrasing here. Eventually, she decides to go back into the town in which that boyfriend resided, but apparently she had just missed him because he was meant to go away and he was meant to go on this other tour around Europe or something like that, and they were essentially going to miss each other. So she's at this bar or this coffee shop sobbing her heart out, just absolutely devastated, thinking that her boyfriend is gone forever, thinking that she's left her life in America behind. She's essentially decided to stay, missed her flight or something of that nature. And in the distance, she sees her boyfriend, and apparently he had left and then come back because he was so devastated he decided to retrace the steps that they had taken together throughout this town. And long story short, it had been at least 30 to 40 years and she has never returned back to live in the States. And it is just the epitome of what you would do or what can happen if you choose experience over practicality, if you choose experience over certainty. It was uncertain of whether or not she would even find that boyfriend again. It was uncertain of whether or not they were a forever endeavor, right? It's unknown whether or not it was the right decision to lean on this person until she was able to learn the language, until she was able to find a career, if she was able to break some waves in her art, through her art, because she ended up devoting her life to art after having made that decision, after having been reconnected with that boyfriend. I thought it was just very interesting. And now this brings me into my next point. The woman in Death in Her Hands lived a good life. She lived a fruitful life. She had a husband. She didn't have any kids. I'm not spoiling when I say this. I believe this is something that you know firsthand, right? This is something that comes out immediately. She is now in her 70s. I believe she's 73. She lived a good, long life of certainty, of security. Which is the right choice? Now, I also, like I said, I really wanted to talk about this because I myself have been feeling this tug and pull game about this focusing on creativity and this leaning into creativity over practicality. But it also has made me think about a few videos I've seen circulating, which is almost the romanticization of a 9-to-5 lifestyle, the romanticization of having a regular job, quote unquote, right? I feel like something that's been happening, and I believe this to be a recession indicator, is that people are yearning for the regularity, for the familiarity of a 9-to-5 classical job. It invited me to do a little bit more research into where this framework even came about. How did we end up here? Why do we have 40-hour work weeks? Why do we structure our work in this way? Now, something that I always have circulating in my life is what I would do if I were to move to Paris. It's a big dream of mine to eventually move there, but I need to understand what my work sector would look like there, and if it's a realistic endeavor for me. I am a Virgo after all. I do like to plan, and I do like to understand what the pros and cons and what the frameworks are going to be. And so sometimes I like to pay attention to work structure. I like to pay attention to work lifestyle. And so I've been comparing kind of European work lifestyles as well as kind of Scandinavian work lifestyles. I've been seeing a lot of videos about the Copenhagen way of life and how it's kind of similar to the Parisian one, in which there is this strong sense of a work-life balance. Now, it is well understood, very homogeneous throughout their society, that in both of these cultures, both in Copenhagen and in Paris alike, it is known that everybody will leave the city in August. Everybody goes on vacation, everybody goes to travel, and that is just a fact. It's understood. The cities will be a ghost town. This is also the case in a lot of other cities in Europe, across Europe, and it seems to be a big priority of theirs is to have this work-life balance. Beyond that, there's something that is unique about it, in which it's kind of understood that I was having a conversation with a coworker of mine, and he kind of discussed, I've always been confused about Parisians because they seem to start their days off a little bit later. They're not at work for 8 a.m. or at work for 7 a.m. They seem to have a little bit of a slower start, but then they also seem to be able to leave work early. They're able to go and enjoy the day, go and be able to enjoy their evening. If you go to a bar at 5 p.m. on a Tuesday or even at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, they're probably going to see some workers who are off from work able to enjoy themselves after work. And it's like, how does this work? How does this match up, right? How do they start late and end sooner? How do they have this ability to leave their entire occupation behind for an entire month, and the entire society is able to do the exact same thing, and the entire framework doesn't come apart, right? And so now to that I answered, I believe that it might be having to do with the framework of their work. I feel like in America, there is so much time allotted to us to do a certain task that we almost drag it out to last that amount of time. If you give yourself an hour to fold your laundry, it might take you an hour to fold your laundry. Rather, if you give yourself half an hour to fold your laundry, you might fill it out in half an hour. I mean, this is my assumption. This is kind of where my thought pattern is leading, where I feel like in other countries and other cultures, there might be less of an emphasis on the amount of time you have to be spending doing something, the amount of time that you need to be quote unquote clocked in to be working on something, and rather on the actual efficacy and completion of the task at hand. Now, all of this kind of led me to think about the actual framework of the 9-to-5 job. How did we get here, and where does it come from? And so I stumbled upon a Medium article by Seren26, and it's called "The concept of a 9-to-5, 5-day work week should have died light years before the pandemic forced us to question it." Now, in this, she introduces us with the fact that the 9-to-5 work week, the 40-hour work week, was introduced in 1926 by Henry Ford when it came to assembly lines and when it came to the productivity of these vehicles that needed to be done within a certain time frame, and every single person had a particular task at hand that they had to complete. And so that is where this type of standardization was created. But she actually invites us to cast our minds even further back. Now, there was a mechanical engineer by the name of Mr. Frederick Winslow Taylor, where she believes that modern day 9-to-5 work was actually kind of laid down its roots. And so this mechanical engineer kind of introduced the importance and the value in standardizing employee work, devising job specifications and work plans to, instead of allowing people to think on their own, create their own work plans, it gave that power, that intellectual and mental work to the employer, to the manager. And so that is where the employee-employer kind of dynamic was born, and it was only exacerbated by the creation of this 40-hour work week. Because what are we doing when we are pouring into this larger corporation, pouring into this larger framework, and telling myself, okay, this is your job, this is what you do this and you do this and you do this, by this time I want you to have done this. You are giving them the power, and you are giving away your agency, essentially, in the work that you are doing. What stands out to me here is that this really doesn't seem natural. I feel like it made sense when it came to mechanical frameworks and having to build a vehicle. In this certain amount of time, I want you to have placed 500 bolts into this particular framework. I don't know mechanicals. Let's call Sydney Sweeney for that one. It doesn't make as much sense to have such rigid job specifications and these types of time frames when it comes to intellectual, mental work. And I really love this quote from the article as well. Think about it. Would you go ballistic if a musician or a painter told you he works 9 to 5? Like he took his palette and flick a switch on his creative side and he started painting at 9 on the dot on a Monday morning. Why should the rest of us be any different? But we are programmed since childhood. We are conditioned to operate in a manner that caused the least disruption and a seamless monitoring by superiors. Enter productivity and performance metrics. This system was successful and transcended decades simply because it worked for the people in power, whoever they were at any point in time. So what does this mean? What does this tell us about this romanticization of the 9 to 5, about this romanticization of corporate lifestyle, of climbing the, social ladder, of doing the safe route, of doing the certain route where you will have PTO, you will have health insurance, you will have all of these different benefits. Maybe it is in Roth IRA, maybe it is all these things that keep us secure, right? In allowing ourselves to remain monitored and controlled by these higher ups, we gain security. But the fallacy of this classical work week really highlights our yearning for control. It highlights our yearning for standardization. It highlights our yearning for direction, for security, and for that certainty. And I feel like it's not a shocker to see this occurring at the same time as when our society is kind of crumbling apart. When you think about how the job market looks, when you think about how the humanitarian crises occurring, when you think about all of this being put into question, your security, your safety, your future being put into question. Of course, it is almost natural for us to claw at any sense of security, claw at any option of this type of security. But I think that the flip side is also prevailing, and that is what I want to bring to you today. Today's job market is almost an immovable and inevitable movement towards a more creative timeline. Like this title says, the 9 to 5 hour work week, the 40-hour work week should have been outdated before the pandemic even made us question it. And the point here being that we are finally questioning it. I feel like it is natural for us to claw and resist the shift that might be occurring, resist the shift towards creative endeavors, the shift towards trying to profit off of whether it be your paintings, whether it be your editing, whether it be your speech and your writing, or whether it be your collaging. I feel like there is a subtle movement here happening, especially when it comes to content creation, just because we have been shown just how money can be made online. There is a subtle shift here occurring towards that type of creativity and the future that could provide for us. The dwindling job market only makes us stress further. The dwindling options for work, whether that be in the computer science sector or whether that be in the video editing sector, with so many new options and parallel solutions, it can be really stressful when it comes to letting go of that certainty and leaning towards our creativity. I guess what I'm thinking is that in a world in which the 40-hour work week and the 9 to 5 work structure is no longer giving us that security, it's no longer giving us that certainty and that sense of safety and future planning, I think it's okay for us to more heavily consider these alternative pathways. Not to scare you, but a lot of people are getting laid off. A lot of people are losing their positions to AI, their job sectors to AI. The amount of positions that need filling are dwindling while the amount of graduates rises. When you are faced with these types of metrics, when you're faced with these types of ratios, it invites you to think of, should I continue to resist this shift, or should I pivot with it? I think that the greatest thing that I took away from the Death in Her Hands quote, as well as the painter that moved to southern France, is that the greatest regret is not sticking with the choice that you make. The painter that moved to France, instead of thinking about what she lost in that security, her probably not having a retirement fund, because I feel like not many artists do, her maybe having forfeited the other benefits that she could have had from sustaining a position in America. Instead of focusing on that, she rather discussed the beauty of the life that she lived as a painter and the beauty of this story of having found this partner and how they found each other again, and how she had never, thought about destiny being something that could apply to her. We're seeing her stick to that reality. We're seeing her stick with that story for herself and stand by it. But with Death in Her Hands, we're hearing that regret in her choice, right? And I heard this somewhere, and I'm struggling to remember where I heard this from. But I think that the biggest thing that you can do for yourself when it comes to this choice between certainty and security, or leaning into creativity and the unknown, is that you need to make it clear to yourself why you are making either choice. Neither is correct, neither is wrong, neither is right. It is only what you choose to do. There is no good and bad. There are just different types of experiences, in my opinion, that is. So if you choose to go back to school and get a finance degree and become a COO at a company, that's one choice that you can make. How can you make that and seize that and really enjoy that and stand within your decision, stand by your choice, and appreciate the benefits that come with it? And then you can also just go and choose the side to quit your finance job and go study philosophy in Ireland and have that be your truth. And maybe you live check to check for 10 years, but you seize every opportunity to learn more about philosophy, and you spend your time going to museums and having intellectual conversations. No, you do not have $100,000 in savings, but you are rich in these experiences. Maybe you are not able to travel as much, but you are rich in these environments and how much you are able to learn and the history that you are able to touch and feel and experience. There are benefits on both ends. There are negatives on both ends. And I feel like the biggest thing that you can do is stand by the decision that you make and understand that the choice is yours, and as long as you continue to make that choice, you might as well enjoy it. Now, there's this poem that I've seen a lot of accolades for, and that is the poem Travel by Edna St. Vincent Millay. The railroad track is miles away, and the day is loud with voices speaking. Yet there isn't a train goes by all day, but I hear its whistle shrieking. All night there isn't a train goes by, though the night is still for sleep and dreaming. But I see its cinders red on the sky, and hear its engine steaming. My heart is warm with the friends I make, and better friends I'll not be knowing. Yet there isn't a train I wouldn't take, no matter where it's going. So something that I've heard been said about this poem is that it's not coming from a place of lack. It's not coming from a place of needing to escape your current environment, but rather it's an appreciation for that tension, for that need, for that yearning to gain new experiences, but also the appreciation for that familiarity. It's understanding that even though you might not be able to take every experience, take every opportunity to go abroad, to travel, to go on that artist retreat, to backpack across the Appalachian Mountains. That came out of nowhere. It's understanding that yearning might reside in you, it might stay there, but it's also in appreciating that familiarity. And I thought that could be a good and nice note for us to end on, because it's natural to yearn and it's natural to question whether or not we are doing the right thing by sticking to our familiar steps, by sticking with the certain and sustainable and secure path. But it's okay to also kind of yearn for that adventure, to yearn for that experience. But again, it's all about what you choose and how able you are to stick with it. Well, I hope that episode kind of made sense to you guys. To be honest, I blacked out a couple times. But I feel like it's kind of a reflection of my inner world. So I guess it's not wasted, right? Let me know what you guys thought. Let me know what you think about this 40-hour work week and its history and how we've gotten here today. Because it really is shocking that we continue to work in this way with maybe 7 to 10 days of vacation time a year. I mean, I don't know how many it really is. Definitely depends per occupation and per company, but I'm sure it's not enough, right? And then a lot of us don't even get PTO. It's kind of crazy that this country continues to fuel itself on this framework, and I feel like it is reflected in our romanticization and our yearning for it again. But don't be afraid to pivot. What's the worst that can happen? You learn something? Okay, well, that's all. Honestly, my brain is fried. I am so thankful that you guys came and clicked on this week's episode. Let me know your thoughts. Please, 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 please. And don't forget to reach out at Kalopsia Pod, Kalopsia Pod on Instagram and TikTok. And it's at Sydneyjotita, SYDNEYDJOTITA on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And I'll see you guys next Friday. Bye.